Hello and welcome to Insight Memory Care's Care Partner Training, Who is in Your Circle? I am Melissa Long, the Director of Education and Support. And at Insight, our mission is to provide specialized care, support, and education for individuals in all stages of memory care or cognitive impairment, their partners, and our community. And our vision, a community where those living with memory or cognitive impairment and their care partners can achieve the highest quality of life. We are happy to say that this year is our 40th anniversary. We are a nonprofit started in '84 that supports families on their dementia journey in Northern Virginia. Our care is specialized adult day programs for people in all stages of the dementia journey. We go from MCI all the way to the end stage on hospice. Our connection is building relationships and supporting care partners on their journey, and our creativity with dementia experts sharing their knowledge and resources because every journey is unique. I would like to introduce our presenter, Carey Candrian. She is an associate professor in the Division of General Internal Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. Carey's research examines how communication affects outcomes in healthcare, and specifically how it impacts older lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender adults and those who care for them. She has spent much of her career investigating how healthcare suffers when patients aren't able to open with medical professionals about who and what matters most to them. She is a community-based researcher working to create more inclusive assisted living communities. She has been an advocate for the routine collection of sexual orientation and gender identity data in hospice. Ultimately, her goal is to effect change in communication systems at the policy level so that older LGBT adults receive the support they and their loved ones want and need the most. Welcome, Carey, and I will unshare my screen so that you can.
Thank you, Melissa.
You're
Do
welcome.
we do introductions or you want me to just go ahead?
You can go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I know we just tested, but if you can't see the first slide, let me know. It's not
Looks
great.
good.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot for having me this evening. I'm really excited to be here. As Melissa mentioned, my work has really focused on end-of-life care for older LGBTQ people. And usually when I say that, I get a lot of questions about how I ended up in such a specific area. And it all started actually when I was in grad school, and I was doing an ethnography to better understand the culture around death and dying, which meant I spent 3 years inside an emergency department, shadowing 3 nights a week and volunteering at a local hospice every Friday night. And in both places, the clinical care was excellent. And I realized very quickly that, well, I had known that, and I think all of us here, that dying is really hard. It's hard for everybody. But what I kept seeing is it's so much harder for people who have been historically stigmatized for most of their lives, like LGBTQ people. And I also realized that so much of what was happening in these sites was obviously clinical, but so much of what was happening was non-clinical. How well patients understood what was going on, how empowered or disempowered patients and their families felt about their ability to speak up and talk about what they wanted and didn't want. So it struck me that there was this undercurrent that was affecting patients, and that was communication, the way people were talking and listening. And so with a PhD in communication, I knew I'd never be able to change someone's prognosis, but I could change the way people talk and listen, which it turns out can really make a measurable difference for people who have been historically stigmatized, like LGBTQ people. And that's how I got into this research, and that's why I continue to stay. So why is it harder for LGBTQ people? They're basically navigating serious illness with 3 major disadvantages. First, financial. 1 out of 3 LGBT adults live at or below the poverty line, a third. And this is for a number of reasons. That for many, they weren't allowed to get married for many years. And so they're aging, often without access to spousal benefits or pensions, which really matter as you age. We also know that which is related to financial, that LGBT people have a very thin network of support. They're less likely to be married, they're less likely to have kids, they're more likely to be estranged from the biological family, which means they're aging with a really thin network of support, which, as we all know, really matter when you're facing something like a serious illness. And underlying and amplifying all of this is really this lifetime of stigma and discrimination, which is concrete effects on LGBTQ people. From the research and the data we have, LGBT adults are disproportionately at risk for a number of health disparities. They have higher rates of anxiety and depression, substance abuse, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and suicide. How exactly does stigma and discrimination have such an impact on this community? Let me give you a little bit of context. When I talk about LGBT older adults, I'm talking about people who grew up in the 40s and the 50s, like Shirley, who didn't come out until she was 81. People who grew up when being LGBT was completely taboo. It was dangerous and it was illegal in most places. People lost their jobs, their homes, their families, like Anne did. And as some of you may know, up until 1973, the American Psychiatric Association listed homosexuality as a mental illness. And it wasn't until 1990 that the World Health Organization removed their classification. Just imagine growing up thinking there is something that wrong with you, that you were sick because you were LGBTQ, how vulnerable you would be, and how much you would internalize the stigma. And even though the laws have changed and the APA changed, the stigma has stayed, and it affects the way LGBT people move through the world, what they share and what they don't. For much of my career, I've really wanted to understand what specifically was contributing to these disparities and what we could do about it. And so I've interviewed over 100 LGBTQ people because the data can't always tell the story about how things have come to be. I wanted to dig deeper. Oops, and click. About 3 years ago, actually, sorry, this was another one, sorry. But the thing about this is that for this generation, they really have honed what I've called this habit of silence about this core part of themselves, and they've honed it for decades. According to Harvard Medical Magazine, the LGBT people are afraid to tell who they are. 48% of LGBT adults say their own doctors and those who care for them don't know that they're LGBTQ because they're afraid if they tell them, their care will get worse. And they're not crazy for worrying. Discrimination is happening all over the healthcare system, including hospice. This was from the American Heart Association in 2021 that's reported that 56% of LGBT adults reported some type of discrimination from a healthcare professional. For those who were trans or gender nonconforming, it jumped to 70%. And in terms of hospice, in a 2020 survey of over 850 respondents, 45% of staff said they directly observed reporting discriminatory behavior towards LGBTQ patients. Everything like rolling eyes when patients were holding hands, to disregarding patient wishes, to not including the partner in major decisions, and outright denial of care. Unfortunately, things are still bad for LGBTQ people, especially as it relates to stigma and discrimination. Very recently, just a few months ago, the Kaiser Family Foundation surveyed over 6,000 LGBTQ respondents, and they found that 65% of the respondents of LGBTQ people said they experienced some type of discrimination in their daily lives. In terms of the impact this has on physical health for LGBTQ people from this survey, 24% of the respondents said that they have negative healthcare experiences. 39% said that these negative experiences make them less likely to seek care. And 6 out of 10 LGBTQ people from the survey said that they prepare for insults and feel that they have to be careful about their appearance and their dress and the way they talk to be treated with respect and get the care that they need.
Carey, we have a question, if you don't mind, if I can pop in. So you seem to have a great presentation. Obviously, you haven't finished it yet, but older LGBTQ people is not just the 30s, 40s, and 50s anymore. I was born in 65 and I'm 58. Where do you classify someone like me who is gay, single, and living with dementia diagnosis already and facing these same things?
How do you relate to these?
Yeah.
I think you're very much a part of it. And I think that when I say older adults, I know I said the 40s and the 50s, but I think it's really, I'm in my 40s. And I think it's really 40s and beyond. I focus specifically because I do think this habit of silence is particularly relevant for the older generation. But I think these statistics are very much relevant for all LGBTQ people across the lifespan. This data is just specific to older adults.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for interrupting me. And in terms of the impacts on mental health from this survey, 68% said that they describe their mental health as fair or poor. 46% said they couldn't get the mental health services that they needed. And to put this all in perspective, and this will be the last data point I say, LGBTQ people are 2 times more likely to not have received the mental health services compared to non-LGBTQ people. So I've given you a lot of data, and one of the things I've been really interested with this research is to really help people humanize it and see the people behind the data. And I'm going to tell you a story about Esther, and I think but to really put this concrete, like to really understand how much the silence and the stigma affects LGBTQ people. Harvard Medical Magazine said it can take up to 12 years off the lives of LGBTQ people who have honed this habit of silence and live in communities that have historically been stigmatized against. So 3 years ago, I interviewed this woman named Esther. When I met her, she'd recently lost her wife, Kathy, to cancer. And the thing was, when hospital staff realized they were a couple, Kathy's care got worse. So they felt like they had to hide their relationship through it all, through Kathy's diagnosis, through her illness, through her treatment, and ultimately her death. And when Kathy died, no one said a word to Esther because she was just the good friend, the emergency contact, not a grieving spouse who just lost the love of her life. And I remember when I asked Esther what the hardest part of the whole thing was. She said, "My wife was dying, and I couldn't even say we were married." Since they were hiding their relationship, Esther couldn't have the grief support that she needed, and it impacted Kathy's care because she couldn't have the person she needed in the room to advocate on her behalf, just hold her wife's hand and just be with her. The thing about Esther and Kathy's stories is it shows how communication affected the outcomes of 2 people, and how different it could have made if we have given attention to the way people talk and listen to each other. Oops, I mean the thing. And so a lot of the things that I've talked about is when you think about how we get to know patients, it can be very scripted. And one of the things that with Esther and Kathy is we typically don't ask routine questions about sexual orientation and gender identity. These are not core questions that we routinely, they're not part of our intake forms, our get to know you interactions. And so these questions can be really uncomfortable for both the asker and the teller. But the thing is the less we ask these questions, the more likely LGBT people are to remain hidden. And when you think about how we typically get to know patients, it can be very formulaic. They can be very scripted. Our forms, our intake questions, our admission conversations, we don't think about it, but they can also be loaded with assumptions. And when your life doesn't fit the script, which is the case for a lot of LGBTQ people, you can get blocked pretty quickly. And so a lot of what I have focused on with communication is really thinking about ways to break the script, really changing the way some of our common questions. So one of the scripts we hear a lot is, for example, around marriage. But the thing is we really don't need to know if someone's legally married. What we really care about is the who, which matters particularly for everyone, but really more for LGBTQ people, particularly in the context of serious illness and dementia, when you're identifying key people in their circle and who matters to people. So some of the ways that I've talked about breaking these scripts, instead of asking some of our routine questions about family and marriage, they can sound like this. Who's the biggest support in your life? And I imagine some of you are already asking questions this way. Who needs to be in the room when we talk about your care? Who's going to need support so they can support you? Who do you consider family? Who are your people? So this is a lot of the ways I've been talking about is really how this habit of silence impacts communication on an individual level and affects LGBTQ people as they access healthcare. This is another woman I interviewed, and her name is Janelle. So I want to move away from forms and really talk about things like goals of care conversations when people are talking about what and hopefully who matters to someone. I met Janelle a year ago when she was transitioning, and she's in her late 60s. And I'm going to play some audio clips from her, and you'll have to listen carefully because you can hear the fear in her voice. But one of the questions that I asked Janelle was, what are some of her biggest fears if she were to get sick and have to enter hospice, for example? Here she is.
As far as palliative care, yeah, I do have concerns. I'm worried that certain things will be outside my control at that point. And I
What do you mean, like?
Oh, like I still have to shave, for example. I don't have hair on my face.
She says at the end, I still have to shave. I don't want to have hair on my face when I die. Here's Janelle again.
I will be perfectly honest that one of the things that I thought about a lot before I transitioned was I don't want to die this way. I want to be buried as a woman. I don't want to be buried as a man. I don't want a man's name.
She says, I don't want to be buried as a man. I don't want to have a man's name. Think about one of the last conversations you have that you were part of or overheard. Where in those questions would there have been space for Janelle to disclose information like this, information that really mattered to who she is and the dignity she wanted at the end of life? These stories that I've been sharing are not unique. Choices like Janelle, especially those who are trans, these are common things that they think about. Esther and Kathy, this is a huge choice LGBT people face all the time when they face healthcare. Do I come out and risk being treated poorly, risk not having my partner in the room, or do I stay silent and hide a fundamental part of who I am? It's a heck of a choice, and it's a really wicked communication problem because on the one hand, as I showed earlier, we have a lot of discrimination happening. On the other hand, and disparities in outcomes. On the other hand, we have a community that has been trained to stay silent and who has honed this habit of silence. And it's all happening in the healthcare system that really limits the way people share critical information about their care. And so one aspect is legislation, of course, giving protections to people that are long overdue. But it's really hard to legislate the way people think and feel, particularly around the LGBTQ community. But one thing is really that we all can start doing is changing the way we communicate and the way we listen, which some of those examples are around breaking the script. Another thing that when working with the LGBTQ community is the way our communication also shows that you're a safe and inclusive person. And it's not just the way we communicate, but these are things we all can do. You can do as individuals and organizations and teams, and you may already be doing these. But for example, just to give you some examples. So I've talked about forms. This is a really critical way of showing people that they have space to disclose who they are and who they need. Pronouns are also really important. I know some of these you can even see them on Zoom. They might feel really insignificant or awkward or uncomfortable if you're not used to using them. But pronouns are really important. They're especially important for trans and non-binary folks. But they're important for everyone in the LGBTQ community because they really send a signal that, hey, you're safe and you're okay. Signs and symbols go a really long way for the LGBTQ community. They can be small, they can be big, but these are things we look for when we enter spaces, when we're meeting with someone. I'll show you some examples that we use, but signs and symbols are a really great way to show and communicate safety and inclusivity. Website and forms and policies and training from really front desk all the way up are really great ways of helping organizational and also personal level communication. So this is a pin we use at the University of Colorado Medicine. They have our pronouns. Again, just any sort of visible sign to let people know that you're safe and okay. You've probably seen these. Lanyards and pins, again, even small signs go a really long way. You might have seen these too. But again, these are really important for people entering your spaces to know that they can be okay disclosing critical information about themselves and who they love, critical information that's really important for their care. As part of my work, as I mentioned earlier, is that I am a researcher, but I've also, when working with communities like the LGBTQ community, helping people really help humanize the data has been a big goal of mine. And so part of my research has been developing a photo exhibit of older LGBTQ people. And more recently, we've made a documentary that's called Just Us, the Longing and Hope of LGBTQ People. So I'm just going to play a short clip from a couple people in the film to really hopefully bring these ideas together and help underscore how important it is to be able to have the information you need to care for someone.
My name is Jean Kuttner, and I am the Chief Medical Officer at UC Health, University of Colorado Hospital, and I'm a Professor of Medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine on the Anschutz Medical Campus. I've been doing this role for about 8.5 years. It is really bringing the voice of the providers, the physicians. We have trainees working with our advanced practice providers, bringing that voice to the executive suite. When I care for patients, I think it's really important to get to know who they are as people. That is probably one of the most important things I do, is who are they as a person, what's important to them, who is their support structure, who and what do they define as family, how do they want to be referred to, who is that person? And then I can then work with that person around whatever those health challenges are that come their way.
I am going to have to rely on professional support and services. I'm going to have to rely on someone to give me my testosterone once a week. I'm going to have to make sure that if something were to happen to me, that I have paperwork that makes sure that my spouse is going to be the one to be there, because we weren't legally married at that point. And if something were to have happened, they would have called my parents, who were not part of my life.
When you're dealing with serious illness, and especially if you belong to the LGBTQI+ community, there's a lot of fear, and the stigma that has been experienced over a period of time can become much more magnified. And because you are at your most vulnerable point in your life.
I can just see the toll on people of not being able to share who they are, I think, and who they love. I think there's multiple consequences. I mean, somebody who has a serious illness is already often struggling and often has distress, and it's not just the physical distress, it's sort of existential, psychosocial distress. And if you're not able to be your authentic self and to share who you are, and it just adds to that distress in incredibly burdensome ways from a very practical standpoint too, in terms of who is allowed to stay with people, who do we turn to for decision making. If we don't know who is important to somebody, and as a spouse or as a partner or as a loved one, then we may make some terribly wrong assumptions and be not including the right people.
So before I end, and why I wanted to show this is really, again, to show how important it is to make sure you're including the people that need to be included, and asking about this in ways that people feel safe and trustworthy to share this information. Because I'm going to, not going to do that. Before I zoom out and end, I do want to just show the current landscape that the LGBTQ community is facing. This is a group called the Movement Advancement Project that keeps tallies on states and keeps tallies on really what's happening around legislation and different policies that impact the way LGBT people are cared for. And we know that by my point in showing these, and also the bans on healthcare in certain states, is to really just show that it's still very dangerous to be LGBTQ wherever you are, even in states that are predominantly green or have higher tallies. The point in all this is to show that what I've been talking about with the habit of silence is that, and the current legal landscape, is it really impacts the way people move through this world who are LGBTQ, what they share, when they share, how they share, and if they share. And so part of this is also really making sure that you are safe and it is okay to talk about these things. because this is important to know that this is a backdrop that LGBT people are entering a lot of spaces. And I do want to end, I touched on this before, and really the impact that this habit of silence is having on a more macro level, and also how it impacts how we understand research, which is really this concrete, these data fields as sexual orientation, gender identity, or SOGI data. The thing that's happened is we don't routinely ask these questions, and the result is, in the vast majority of literature and legislation and policy, LGBTQ people have been absent and really invisible without asking these questions. And we also know that these questions can be very awkward. Again, for those, can be awkward and uncomfortable without proper training and education for both those asking and those telling, especially on the heels of what I just talked about with the current legislation. But we have to start asking these questions in a way that people really can feel safe. So not only that it will allow us to have good data about the LGBTQ community, which will allow us to better understand their experiences with dementia, for example, their experiences in healthcare in general, and really then be able to develop targeted interventions that can actually help the LGBTQ community as they navigate serious illness. Another piece with this is not just from a pure data perspective, but the understanding that this is a really critical part of who someone is, and it matters throughout life, and especially when someone is facing a serious illness, and including dementia. And so I hope, if you don't remember anything, I hope you really understand how deep this habit of silence is, and not just for the older adult community. This is a habit that LGBT people face throughout their lifespan, and it really affects how they communicate and how they disclose information, and it also has concrete effects on their health. And so I hope when you ask questions next, whether it's to patients or caregivers, you really think about the information. See, I'm not going to. I'll send those to Melissa. These were just examples. You really think about what information you really need to know. What if the patient is trans and had to answer your question? Or if their family had rejected them? Or if they were the same-sex partner, but not actually married? Does your question shut them out? Or does it invite them in? Does it say, hey, I'm okay with who you are and who you love? All the LGBT people I've met in my research, they're really not asking for a lot. They just want to be able to talk openly and be heard without prejudice. And all we have to do are break these scripts a little, give them space, and show them we're safe. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Carey. So I have a couple things, and if any of you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and I will ask for you. What is your feeling, and I don't know if anyone who's on has heard of this, it's the LGBTQ plus healthcare directory, where medical professionals can list that they're LGBT friendly, so that people can have that safe medical care. What are your thoughts on that website?
Yeah, the directory through GLAMA?
No, it's lgbtqhealthcaredirectory.org.
Got it. I think it's part. I hope it's part of GLAMA. We actually, I'm on their board. So it's through Tegan and Sarah gave them funding.
Yes,
I think it's terrific.
The foundation. Yep.
Yeah, it's terrific. And because I think that's been one thing in Colorado, people have really wanted to be able to access that. The thing is that there's no training or education required. And so this is just self-identifying that you're okay, which I think is a terrific start. So I encourage anyone on here who's an ally or part of the community. Great, Melissa, thanks. Yep, that's it. To sign up, because this is something that is really important for LGBTQ people to have choices when they're accessing care. So yeah, I think it's excellent.
And the other thing, what a coincidence today. I'm hoping some of the statistics that we have with disparity in care is going to change in your PowerPoint today. After Biden pardoned today, he said, today I'm righting a historic wrong and using my clemency authority to pardon any former service members who were convicted simply for being themselves. And so I'm hoping that's going to change that statistic.
Wait, wow, when did that break? That's great news.
That broke this afternoon. Yes, I was so excited when I saw it.
Wow, thank you for telling me that. Great. Yeah, that will hopefully that will definitely update.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that the disparities in that, because that's a lot of benefits for people who lost them.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, that was just a neat one that I saw. I know through my personal experience, I've had instances where I've worked with individuals who haven't gone through the full transition and they were getting a medical ID with me, and I would let it go to the gender that they felt they were versus what their biological is, and the change in their face and their demeanor in the room was just magical to watch, and let them know that I heard them and I wanted to honor that was a big deal. You know,
Yeah.
and I had other instances where I've been working with couples and caregivers will say, "Oh, that's her sister." And I immediately stop them in their tracks and go, "No, it's not. They've been together for 47 years. That is her wife. You need to acknowledge her that way." And I don't let them walk around on that
Wow.
because it's
That's
not fair. So I'm constantly out there. I don't keep my mouth shut. I get in trouble sometimes, but I just feel, you know, I need to be a voice out there and
yeah.
help with this piece with that. And I guess one of my questions would be to you, if any of them are struggling to have that network, you know, great, we have a resource for doctors
Mhm.
that they can go to. But what about the other um things that might be affecting, you know, them having a social network, having people, so, you know, I'm sure you've seen Gen Silent. And for those that haven't seen it, it's a
Mhm.
great documentary. And if you're here local in Virginia, there's actually a showing of it at the end of this month
Oh, great.
that's being shown. But in that documentary, they show a trans woman who had no one. And so all these people had to like put together a meal train and a visiting train to help her in those end stages of her life. And how do we build that? Who do we call? Like, what do we do for that, Carey?
The great question, Melissa. I think, you know, we in Colorado finally, and I don't actually, I think it ended up dissolving with our community organization, is having a support group, a resource for particularly people who are at the intersection. I mean, people who identified as LGBTQ and had a dementia diagnosis, to get the support, because as you, I mean, it was like a quadruple coming out, and um, they started one and then tried to say, you know, we didn't get enough people, but I think those spaces are really critical. And then talking with people, I mean, to be able to not have to worry about this on top of everything else, I think is the most fundamental thing we can do. And so I think what I've seen in Colorado is that people have just, we actually call it the Lesbian Lounge on Monday, and it's not necessarily for dementia, but it's been community run and community led and community initiated. And I think a lot of it has to happen by the community themselves, and really realize that connection and community is a protective factor against so many things. And because we can't wait for, and hopefully that's going to put pressure on some of these larger organizations or people to have these spaces. But I think that we know how important community is, and I think being able to just start it on your own.
And
And
I
that's
know,
why I think like you're the younger, you know, like I volunteered to do it on Mondays, but I think it'd be great to do something even multi-generational and have like,
yeah, so we're actually going to be hosting Sage Tables.
oh, good. That's
September,
really great.
October, November, and December. We're gonna do one every month in the fall at 4 different locations. So I'm excited. We've done one before, so we're excited to get
Nice.
moving again. We also have an LGBTQ caregiver support group that we do the
That's great.
third Wednesday of every night. We did it last night because of Juneteenth interfered with it this month. But you know, it started out really slow. And my one person that's been devout for this whole year being really patient, we had a great turnout last night, and she goes, "Finally, we have more people." She was so excited. But, you know, it's one of those things where it does take time because it's that trust building. You know,
Yeah.
we can't, I have learned as an ally, we can't just throw a rainbow on something and make people think they feel safe. We've got to walk the walk. We can't just talk the talk.
Exactly.
We have 2 questions, it looks like. Thank you for your research, your presentation, and your support. It's important to ask the questions you listed and often to ask more than once. I can take a while to build trust. In my own life, being way out for 32 years, I still choose almost every day when and with whom I share about my life and to name my wife as my wife. Often I say partner and wait for someone's reaction before I say wife. And I live in California and work in worship and organizations where I'm 100% out. So imagine what it's like for
Yeah.
folks who haven't had this same support. Um, And then one's identity is also a factor in providing care for another family member and caring for my father who has dementia. I still choose what to say about myself to him as a caregiver.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a definitely something to think about. I know we have people in the area who have transitioned after someone with dementia has passed because they
That's,
wanted to wait. So I definitely see where you're coming from, Stephanie, with that input with that. Yeah,
yeah.
it's not an easy road, but please know there's lots of us out there that are advocating for you. Insight's a safe place. We have lots of support groups and education and so forth. And I hope we can bring Carey back. I'd love to talk to you about the documentary you just did and maybe do a showing of that. That would be awesome. You know, to bring more out there. Does anyone else have any questions?
I'm so curious to hear from people. I can't see you. I can't. I appreciate Stephanie you saying something. I think that also is a great, I mean, and in California to like, this is still hard. It's
Yeah.
not for everyone.
Yeah. What was interesting to me is the map you showed at the end showing where the laws were. And I think it was CNN just put out an article a day or two ago about where the most people live that are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And most of them live in the South and on the East Coast. And that's where some of the worst laws are. And it shocked me that people are still staying there. I was a little surprised by that. And I don't know if that's because of the disparity of the income that they can't move. I don't know if that's playing a role in it, but that was interesting to me when you put that map up after seeing the other one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do you have any advice for individuals that are living this on ways they can guide the medical community if we're not asking the right questions,
Mhm.
if they feel comfortable, what they can say?
It's a great question because I do think that, you know, it's not up to LGBTQ people to fix all this, but I do think the more people do feel comfortable, whether part of the community or an ally, I do think the better. Because I think a lot of, I mean, I think there is overt discrimination and stigma. And I think a lot of it, people are just so routine and habitual that I think they don't quite understand the impact that some of their questions and words and behaviors can have. And so I think the more of us who speak up and say, and like you, Melissa, I mean, that no, she's not her sister. She's, and same thing, like, no, this is not my friend. This is my wife or this is my partner. I think the more of us who can continue to speak up, I think it's going to put more pressure on people to really do better. And, and I really hope, and I think that's all we can do right now is have hope that things can change. And I do think that, and then I think for people to then see, you know, a couple who happen to be, you know, lesbians that have been in love for 43 years, I do think that does something to people. And of course, I mean, it's not going to change everybody, but I think the more we can speak up and show and normalize this, and I think the better. I think the more hearts and minds will hopefully open.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
So the last piece I want to share with you guys, this is not my, sorry, give me 1 second here. It's not cooperating. There we go. All right. So just to end this, because I didn't see any more questions, but feel free to pop them up while I'm talking. We have lots of upcoming events on insightmcc.org/events. You can also reach out to me as my email, my phone number, my extension. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have at any point in time. I do free consults. So if you're having difficulties with someone with dementia, I'm happy to be there. I've been in the field over 20 years, so I've been around a little bit. And just want to tell you guys thank you for being here and sharing this space with us. And we look forward to what will be in the future for what Insight can bring to the table for all of you. But please know that we're a safe place and we want to have you a part of our community, because having dementia is not easy. Being part of the LGBTQ community is not easy. And so we want to give you some sense of security and safety and the support that you need to get through all of this. So, oh, wait, something pop up. From Brother John, he said, we have to advocate as a community and have a voice insisting on change. I was surprised there were no gay men as part of this presentation, and there continues to be ageism involved. As a member of NAPA, we keep telling people older adults are really 50 and older. I agree with you that older adults definitely, the age has shifted for that. And I think some of that has to do with just some of the early diagnoses we're having for dementia plays a role in that and how people are aging differently. But
And the reason why these are actually, I had a grant from the Lesbian Health Fund to do a project that interviewed just older LGBTQ women, and they ended up becoming a photo of the project. So that's why they're all specific to the women.
we can work on getting some men pictures though. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. Last one, really appreciate this presentation. I feel affirmed and didn't even think I needed that. Coming out and feeling comfortable is definitely a lifelong process. Well, I'm so happy we could do that for you, Stephanie, and all of you. So have a wonderful evening. And this is recorded, so it will end up on our website under webinars if you ever want to rewatch it. So thank you guys very much and have a wonderful evening.
Great, thanks. Oops. Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Can't leave.